Okay, let's do the second one. All right. Ready to do number two? Okay, here we go. I want you to open your books to page 153. 153, okay? Small group discussion topics for Korean students. Open your book to page 153. Our topic today is going to be U.S. bases in Korea. Okay? Most Koreans see having U.S. bases in Korea as a necessary evil. A necessary evil means something that you may not like, but you have to have it anyway. All right, let's begin. About 25,000 American troops were stationed in South Korea in 2008, and keeping that many troops in the country has an enormous price tag. To be stationed means that that's where they're sent. In the military term, if you're stationed someplace, that means the military sends you there, and that's where your job is. To have an enormous price tag means something that's very, very expensive. Most of that cost is paid by the U.S. government, but Korea also pays a share. As Korea's economy has improved over the years, Americans feel it's only right, in other words, it's the right thing to do, it's the proper thing to do, for Koreans to share, to increase, but many Koreans disagree. Many Koreans don't think so. In fact, if it were up to some Koreans, there wouldn't be any U.S. bases in Korea at all. In other words, if some Koreans could decide, there wouldn't be any U.S. bases here. As far as they are concerned, paying to keep American soldiers in Korea is a waste of money. Most Koreans see having U.S. bases in Korea as a necessary evil. They don't especially like having foreign troops running around their country, but they also believe that having foreign troops there is the best way to keep the North Koreans on their own side of the DMZ. The DMZ stands for the Demilitarized Zone. Of course you know that. Ever since the peninsula was divided at the end of the Second World War, the North has eyed the South as a prize to be won. In other words, the North has always coveted the South ever since the country was divided. For decades, the desire to conquer the South was part of the ideology. In other words, it was the ideas that they all believed in. But during the past 2 decades, the South has grown into one of the world's wealthiest countries, while the North has become more and more destitute. Become one of the most destitute. Destitute means desperately poor. Given the new reality, what are the chances that the North could conquer the South? If the answer is 0, then why is the U.S. military still here? And the answer is 0. Now, let's take a look on page 154. Okay. Ever since the end of the Korean War in 1953, the rationale, or the reason given, for keeping American forces in Korea has been that the North's million-man army would roll its tanks across the DMZ as soon as the U.S. forces withdrew. In other words, as soon as the U.S. forces are gone, then the North invades. But a half a century later, the probability, in other words, likelihood, could it happen? Is it likely? Is it not likely? Of such an invasion taking place is almost nil. In other words, it's almost 0. The South's GDP is now 40 times bigger than the North. 40 times. It's 40. And its modern state-of-the-art weaponry, in other words, the weapons that South Korea has, is the best, and it's the most advanced. Would destroy every one of the North's 1970s vintage tanks before they got across the DMZ. In other words, the South has all these weapons that are brand new and work really well. And the North have all these tanks that were built back in the 1970s and are really, really old. So if the North tried to invade the South, well, the South would just use their advanced weaponry and just wipe them all out immediately. The North's infamous million-man army is in disarray. Now, infamous is a word that means famous for being bad, okay, for being evil, like the infamous Kim Jong-il, okay, is in disarray. It means it's disorganized. There's people are running around. They don't know what they're doing. There's no organization. They're all lost, okay. Soldiers suffer from malnutrition. Malnutrition means bad nutrition. They don't have enough to eat. And they spend more time rummaging for food and preventing food riots than preparing to fight. Now, rummaging for food basically means to look for food. So they go through the countryside and they try to find food. They try to find mushrooms, or they try to find berries, or maybe they'll go to the garbage pit and they'll look through the garbage, and because they got to find something to eat, right? The North's tanks and planes are outdated and in need of maintenance. They need to be fixed, which can't be performed because there are no spare parts. In other words, they don't have any extra parts around, right? So they need to be fixed, but they don't have any parts for the tanks. Even if they had them, there's no fuel to operate the equipment anyway, because they don't have any gasoline. There's a gasoline shortage. The North has lost two allies. Their allies are their friends, which made the 1950 invasion possible. The USSR doesn't exist anymore, and China is more interested in pursuing its booming trade, booming means ever growing, right, with the South than invading it. Helping the North invade the South again would mean having to fight its biggest trading partners who are crucial to China's economic development. As for the North's nuclear weapons, they can't be used. Dropping even one of them on the South would bring about a swift, means quick, military response that would end up in its own annihilation. In other words, it would destroy itself. Because if they dropped a bomb on, say, Seoul and blew up Seoul, well, then the United States and what's left of the Korean army would just drop all kinds of bombs on North Korea, and then there wouldn't be anything left. Everything would be destroyed. Okay, let's go to page 155. 155 right here. Okay. So the question remains, if the North has lost its capability of invading the South, and if the South's well-stocked military can easily defend the country against the North's ragtag army anyway, then why are U.S. forces still in Korea? Well-stocked military means that if something is well-stocked, it means that there's a lot of it. So if you say the well-stocked pantry, it means that there's a lot of food in the pantry. If you say the well-stocked grocery store, there's a lot of food in the grocery store. If you say a well-stocked military, it means there's a lot of military hardware, military armor, tanks, bombs, planes, etc., etc. Okay? Against the North's ragtag. Well, ragtag means that they're not disorganized. They're in disarray. They're wearing rags. There's just not much to them anymore. So, if it's like that, right, then why are the U.S. forces still in Korea? If the U.S. forces don't need to be here, because the South can just so easily annihilate the North, then why are they still here? The answer is twofold. A strategic interest. In other words, it's very important for strategy because it's a very important location. Korea is a very important location. And B, economics. Although they don't talk about it much, the U.S., South Korea, and Japan all see China with its huge population as the next possible threat to world peace. They believe that having military bases in Korea is a major deterrent to China's potential military adventurism. Now, a deterrent is something that happens to prevent something from happening. And military adventurism basically means when a military gets all puffed up about itself and starts invading a lot of different countries. We saw Japan had military adventurism back in the 40s when they invaded all of Asia, right? It's the same reason why there are U.S. forces in Japan. As for the economics, the U.S. pumps about $5 billion into the South Korean economy each year. To pump it in means to put it in, right? The idea when you pump something in, it means that you put a lot of it in, okay? And that's something the South wouldn't like to give up. Now, why would the South want to give up $5 billion a year added to their economy? So in spite of the periodic demonstrations by Koreans for the pullout of U.S. forces, periodic means every once in a while, from their country, that's not likely to happen anytime soon. Although U.S. forces have been reduced to from 37,000 a few years ago to just 25,000 now, the main focus has been not on pulling them out, but on moving them to locations where they are less visible. In other words, where they're not seen as much. The only problem is that Koreans in less visible locations don't want them there either. In other words, they're going to be moving the Americans down to the middle of the country because they don't want them to be seen as much. But the Koreans that live in the middle of the country, they don't want them there either. Okay? All right, so now what I want you to do is I want you to take a look on page 156, and these are the questions that you're going to be answering on Voxapop. So while it's fresh in your mind, get to it. See you soon.